Welcome, everyone. This is the International Peace Coalition. This is the 89th meeting we've had in a row. I'd like to welcome all of you to this special discussion today. Uh, we, my name is Anastasia Battle. I'll be your moderator, as well as Dennis Small and Dennis Speed. And as I like to remind everyone, we created this forum 89 weeks ago in order to unite the peace movement all around the world, whether you're from the left, the right, whatever ideology you're from. If you are for true peace, you are welcome here. And if we actually want to achieve this goal, we need to unite as many peoples on the planet to make this happen. So thank you all again for joining us. We have an excellent lineup of leaders today. This is very special. I'll just go through the agenda so you guys can all get a sense of what we're doing today. We'll have Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder of the Schiller Institute. We have a very special guest, Her Excellency Dr. Naledi Pandor, former Minister of International Relations and Cooperation of South Africa. President Donald Ramotar, the former president of Guyana. And we'll have representatives from the Eisenhower Media Network, Dennis Fritz, who we are also happy to have on during the discussion period. I also would like to make a special acknowledgement that we have participating today connected to the call, South Africa's ambassador to Mexico, Her Excellency Beryl Sizulu. So I want to just acknowledge her as well and thank her for joining us today. To start us off, I'd like to go to Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder of the Schiller Institute, to introduce the discussion. Please go ahead, Helga.
Well, first of all, I want to say hello to all of you. And obviously, it is our special honor that we are joined today by Dr. Naledi Pandor, who is very clearly one of the eminent leaders of the Global South, which is the global majority, whose voice has to become much, much stronger if the world is supposed to get ever to a peaceful order. So I want to very especially greet you, but also naturally all the other distinct speakers. Well, I think we are in the most dramatic change of an epoch, which is on the one side fraught with incredible dangers, and the danger of a global nuclear war is still not completely off the table. But on the other side, I think that there is absolutely hope that, if we join our efforts, that we can move humanity into a better era of a new paradigm. Now, the whole world is right now obviously reacting to the shakeup caused by the election of President Trump. And he, by making a phone call together with President Putin, has caused, at least in the transatlantic world, a complete earthquake and freakouts and nervousness of unprecedented dimensions. But I think it's that part of what he is doing is extremely promising, and it represents a true breakthrough. According to the Russian spokesman Peskov, a meeting is set and being prepared between Trump and Putin in the short term. Location is not yet settled, but he said there is a lot to talk about. And Trump already said that he wants to restart nuclear arms control negotiations with Russia and China. This was widely reported by the Chinese media, but a Chinese spokesman said that the United States should go ahead by being an example of nuclear disarmament, given the fact that the United States and Russia have the largest nuclear arsenals, and that way other countries could then follow. He also said that he has a plan to settle the Ukraine crisis by giving assurances to Russia that Ukraine cannot join NATO, and that way addressing one of the major root causes for the war. And he also said that Ukraine cannot expect to have the same territory like in the borders before 2014. And he basically said that the Biden administration provoked the conflict. He also said that he trusts Putin, that Putin, he believes, wants peace, and he wants Russia to be back in the G8. So for starters, this is a very welcome break to the previous policy. And naturally, if you look at the British media, it's a complete freak out and hysteria, saying, from Trump sold Ukraine down the river to this is appeasement. So they cannot reconcile themselves with it. And, obviously, this is hitting the Munich Security Conference, which is taking place starting today, like a lightning. Now, the other major crisis which we are extremely concerned with is naturally what happens in the Middle East. There, the initial remarks by President Trump were rather horrible when he proposed to turn Gaza into a new beautiful Riviera. However, all the Palestinians should be relocated to Jordan, to Egypt, and to other places, other countries, which naturally is completely unacceptable for the Palestinians and for most of the world with it. So, we immediately went into a mobilization and said we have to activate now the Oasis plan, because you need a two-state solution. But given the devastation of Gaza and also the West Bank, you absolutely have to combine it with an economic development plan immediately. So when Trump was visited by King Abdullah of Jordan, Trump reiterated his proposal to dislocate all the Palestinians, to which King Abdullah was not immediately countering this, but sitting there more or less quietly. But after the meeting, he put out a statement that if the United States would attempt to do that, Jordan would declare war on Israel. And, that is very obviously because already now 60% of the Jordanian population are Palestinians, and it would, threaten the destabilization of not only the Kingdom of Jordan, but, if such such policies would be accepted, it would be a threat to the stability of every single country in the region. Now, obviously, the other affected countries, especially Egypt, also do absolutely not agree with it. They rejected it like all other Arab neighbors. And Egypt is now conducting on the 17th, that is in 4 days from now, in 3 days from now, a Cairo conference on an alternative plan. This plan is very good. It basically proposes the reconstruction of Gaza, but with the Palestinians remaining in their homeland. But obviously, we think that it is a step in the right direction. But I come to what I think is needed in a second. Now, the NATO allied security people in the world, or in much of the world, are right now meeting in Munich for a 3-day conference. And I want to say this, the so-called Wehrkunde-Tagung, which is the name the Munich Security Conference used to have when still Ewald von Kleist and Horst Telschik were the leaders. And, at that time, it was a forum for a real dialogue among nations on security concerns of their country and related issues. But unfortunately, the Munich Security Conference, after the successors of Horst Telschik took over, has turned into a propaganda, into a public relation event of NATO and the military-industrial complex. So right now, basically, these people Europeans of various kinds. They have invited for the first time major speakers from the global south, not the first time, but more emphasis this time. And they are in a complete disarray because they realize that the old liberal order is disintegrating, that with the arrival of Trump in the White House, their so-called rules-based order is out of order, is basically finished. And naturally, a big freak out is on the fact that President Trump closed down the USAID, which had a budget of anywhere between 40 and 60 billion per year. And apart from so-called humanitarian aid, it was the key vehicle for so-called soft power of the United States, which in not so nice words meant political destabilizations, manipulations, color revolution, and the like. And naturally, the people who use these tools to maintain their rules-based order are now in a disarray about the fact that that is cut off. So, but that is very good. C.D. Vance, the vice president, just addressed the Munich conference half an hour ago or an hour ago, and he gave the Europeans a lecture in democracy by basically saying the problem with the Europeans is that they're afraid of the voters. And he called upon them that they should no longer ostracize elected oppositions, which is rampant in all of Europe right now. So looking at this picture, which is clearly evolving, and given the fact that the old order is breaking apart, however, the new order has not yet taken shape. I think it is extremely urgent that we move with the International Peace Coalition and all related forces with it to try to put a new paradigm on the table. And as we discussed, or as I said many times before, I think that all the problems of the world can only be addressed efficiently if one agrees on a new global security and development architecture, which takes into account the interest of every single country on the planet in the tradition of the Peace of Westphalia. Because the conclusion of that peace was that unless you take into account the interest of all others, peace is impossible. So that means for the Middle East, which is right now the most urgent question, we should try to get the combination of an Arab peace plan as it is promoted by Egypt and other Arab countries, but with the addition that the two-state solution must include an oasis plan, because I think that only if one has a wide development perspective for the entire Middle East, not just Israel and Palestine, but for all the countries which have been destroyed by previous interventionist wars, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, and many other countries in the region, they need urgent development. And the Oasis Plan, which proposes to create new large amounts of fresh water through canals, through an irrigation system, through large amounts of ocean water to be desalinated with the help of nuclear energy as the basis for infrastructure and industrial development of this entire region, which right now is predominantly a desert. Obviously, the immediate question is that the humanitarian aid must get into Palestine because people are dying as we speak here. And, but this whole package has to be put on the agenda as one for it to succeed. So these were my initial remarks, and I give the word back to you, Anastasia.
Thank you very much for that opening, Helga. It's very important to get this overview of what's happening in the world. And I would just like to say, on behalf of the International Peace Coalition, I want to thank Her Excellency Naledi Pandor for joining us. She is the former Minister of the International Relations and Cooperation of South Africa and has been a absolutely wonderful leading voice for peace and justice in the world. So thank you so much Your Excellency Naledi Pandor, for joining us. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to join your deliberations. I believe that they're very important. I think the OASIS plan presents a set of very useful proposals that could be looked at by groupings that are in contention as the basis for further discussion. From our own experience as South Africa, having agreed 30 years ago that we would enter into negotiations with those who had oppressed us for many, many decades, we know that once you get around the table, it is the former oppressed who must determine what future they would like to see. And so it is very important that we never make assumptions on behalf of those who are experiencing harm. And we need to find ways of getting their views on the table in order to ensure that whatever outcome is arrived at is one that has the legitimacy of the support of the formerly oppressed. So while I fundamentally agree that a core part of what needs to be addressed as we go into the future is the matter of the reconstruction of the territory in which the people of Palestine reside, I believe imperative is to engage the Palestinian people, their leadership, their civil society, and to ask them, how do you see the future? And of course, the enemy, in quotes, as we used to call our oppressor, that they need to speak to is the people, and particularly the government of Israel, as well as the allies who have supported Israel so vigorously in its oppression of the Palestinian people. So we have to look at a means through the International Peace Coalition, a means of drawing these groupings together and actually having them give us a sense of what kind of future do they imagine. And I wish to indicate that if that future includes continued denial of human rights, continued denial of freedom, disrespect for sovereignty, that is no basis for a political settlement. So there are certain, I think, key agreements that just need to be an accepted base. I welcome the notion of a two-state solution. It has been the position which we have all supported, the majority of us, in the General Assembly, in the United Nations. But the two-state solution, as we imagined it when the resolution was first adopted, the territory has fundamentally altered from what existed at that time. The increased number of settlements by Israelis has made it improbable that you could have a sovereign territory of Palestine. That can only be achieved if there is agreement that there would be resettlement on other land of those persons who have occupied Palestinian territory. And you have seen in the past a year and a half of conflict against Gaza that the temperatures are so high, the levels of hostility, even between ordinary civilians, are of such an extreme character that it is going to be very, very difficult to get a discussion, rational, very carefully constructed discussion underway. The settler community have even gone so far as to attack humanitarian aid trucks to kill Palestinian civilians. So it's gone well beyond the former armed forces of Israel. In addition, Hamas and the other groupings within Palestine must accept that a settlement has to be found between the two, and that you're not going to destroy one or the other. And so I think the international peace processes could begin to establish coalitions through a number of key conversations. The first would be to test the probability of an engagement between Israelis and Palestinians. We need to understand, are the Palestinians ready to sit around a table that would include representatives of Israel? Similarly, are Israelis ready in similar fashion to sit around the table? What would be the key issues that would be brought to that table? And who might be the honest interlocutors who would be trusted to facilitate a very complex process of this kind? So I believe a great deal of work needs to be done. I also think we're in a very dangerous time because we are speaking through headlines rather than through rationality. So we need leadership. We need to find a way through the Schiller Institute of identifying who are the adults in the room, who can actually live without being on a headline every day, who is ready to engage in a serious fashion to actually settle the matters of the world. It's not going to do the globe good to have America and China at each other's throats on the trade agreements. This harms our smaller economies and doesn't do the world good at all. So we need adults, we need leaders, and I haven't as yet really been able to identify who are the leaders. So I believe that the Schiller Institute, along with other organizations of similar strength, could begin to assume that leadership role primarily for purposes of convening, of initiating conversation, and developing an agenda. I believe there are leaders of the South who could play a role. You know that South Africa has been one of the subjects of a recent executive order of the President of the United States of America. We believe there's been a great deal of misrepresentation of our policy and our policy intentions, and even those people that President Trump has offered refuge in America have said that they have no wish to leave their country, South Africa. So clearly there's misinformation out there, and this executive order was signed without proper research, without consultation with the government of South Africa, and has really put us in a very negative light unnecessarily. Hence, I return to my view that what we need are adults in the room. And perhaps the International Peace Coalition could begin a series of meetings with distinct groupings with the intention of arriving at that larger global consultation where we then could begin to develop an agenda that allows us to address those key problematique that are affecting the globe and causing the disarray that we witness at present. As we speak of the Middle East, we must also recall the Sahel in Africa. We should have reference to Sudan, that is under great stress, as well as very poor African countries that are bearing a significant burden of refugees and displaced persons without much world attention or commentary on their plight. So there's a great deal for us to do. And I look forward to the International Peace Coalition identifying these people I call adults and persuading them along with other organizations. So the first step is let us establish a global peace coalition. And then working through that, let us be more ambitious until we arrive at a point where one of the critical issues we wish to address, which I believe as first prize is the Middle East conflict, really gets focused attention, and we attempt through various resources to arrive at a solution. I would want to see the United Nations also involved. I believe in the last few years, there's been a genuine and rather malicious attempt to diminish the status of the United Nations as the premier multilateral institution. And so I believe in whatever we do, we shouldn't be seen to be affirming that intention, but should allow the UN, which is our global body, to actually take its place in supporting the resolution of global conundrums. So I will pause at that point. Let me conclude by saying, while I agree that this moment offers an opportunity for the South to come into its own, the South is not a coherent, coordinated political formation. Even within BRICS, there are different philosophical orientations, different economic strengths. So while there are shared perspectives and objectives, it is difficult and perhaps not helpful to imagine the South as a coordinated, coherent political formation. But it is a useful rubric that we could draw on. Thank you very much. I hope I've made some sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your statements and your endorsement of what we're trying to do here in this process, and for acknowledging the adults in the room. And I also hope that we can use this forum to find more adults in the world, actually in leading positions of government. So thank you so much for your assistance in that. And I think we can view this as a clarion call for the adults to gather in the room now with us. So thank you very much, Your Excellency, for that. Now I'd like to continue. It's also an honor to have on President Donald Ramotar, who is the former president of Guyana and also a regular participant in the International Peace Coalition. Thank you so much for joining us, President Ramotar.
Thank you so much for having me. I wanted to greet all of you who are here, all peace fighters, people struggling for peace. And just to know that we live in a world today that is very integrated on the one hand, and on the other hand, the inequality has never been so stark as we have it at this point in time. As a result of this situation, we experience great instability and often create grave dangers to countries, to regions, and to the world as a whole. It has been recognized that it is important in creating conditions for sustainable peace. We need to deal with the inequality and the poverty created by the unjust socioeconomic relations that are predominant in our world today, and they exist both within countries and between countries. We need to have a very bold plans and initiatives to deal with these issues. The plan must be anchored, in my view, in the assumption or the axiom that there is a very strong correlation between peace and development. The two concepts tend to promote and reinforce each other, and there is truly a dialectical relationship between them. Therefore, looking at the events with a world view, with a perspective of the whole world or large regions like the Middle East, suggests to us that we have to be bold and think in very global terms. We have to think in terms of mutual benefits, or as President Xi Jinping of China has put it, we have to think about win-win positions where we all will benefit and there will be no losers. It is in this context that we must view the LaRouche Oasis plan. This plan is grounded in the philosophy and the views that development and peace are the two sides of the same coin, and if both are to be sustainable, they have to be seen as moving together in a positive correlation. The proposals are imaginative in it and sought to integrate the poor and the rich, to develop the poor areas, while we're not talking about being Robin Hood to make the rich poorer, but to ensure that the poor areas are also come up and be as rich in order to give them the possibility of catching up. And this relates not only within and between countries, but between the north and the south of our world that we have to deal with. Taken together with other initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative that was proposed and being implemented by China, gives a lot of hope that we can deal with many of the scourges that have created much of the crises that plague our world today. Allow me to touch in passing on another plan that was developed about 2 years ago. It came out at a meeting of the G7 countries. And while I think there were some good proposals in that plan, and that plan, I think the Chinese even had welcomed it, even though, but my own view is that this plan was put forward by the G7 countries, but I don't think that it will succeed, largely because of what it is premised on. And it is premised on countering China's Belt and Road Initiative. I believe that any plan that is based on where the main focus is not really to help to resolve the fundamental issues that creates problems in our world, but seeks to undermine another group of countries or a country that is seeking to do their best to change the world for the better and to sabotage their efforts, I don't think it will succeed. And we see that idea is not confined to one set of the ruling circles in the United States, but it goes across the board. Because although this plan was developed under the Biden administration, with his kind of leadership in the G7, we see that President Trump had already forced Panama to withdraw from the Belt and Road Initiative using their power in that direction. But I wish to come back to the Oasis plan and see that this is an opportunity, now that they're talking about the reconstructing the Gaza and really looking at the situation in the Middle East, that this plan can be central to a lot of what is being talked about today. Allow me also to deal with some of the other issues that were raised just now by the two previous speakers, as it relates to the issue in the Middle East. I think one of the one of the major weakness in the continuous failure of coming to a settlement in the Middle East has to do with the fact that the United States has managed to remove any country that has an objective view of what is taking place and remove them because of their support for Israel. And they are giving Israel a carte blanche to do as they please in these areas. So even if you look at now, with the work that is being done by the United States, Egypt, and Qatar, none of these three countries are really honest brokers in this regard. The United States is the one that is supplying the weapons to destroy the Palestinian people and to help in encouraging ethnic cleansing, give them diplomatic support at the United Nations, Security Councils, and other areas. Now we're even banning the International Criminal Court for attempting to charge Netanyahu. And they are now also turned their attention on South Africa, that has really been the country that has saved our conscience in many, many areas. And Egypt is totally dependent on the United States economically, and Qatar is the host of the United States' largest military base in the Middle East. So I think that one of the principal things that we have to do now is to get back other forces in the negotiating sector. I spoke about this last week. And I would say, since this matter arose from the United Nations, then the United Nations must begin to take back some amount of responsibility in bringing a settlement into the Middle East area. And I would want, as I proposed last week, I thought about it even more, and I think even more we should try to bring back the members of the Security Councils, all the prominent members of the Security Council, the 5 prominent members of the Security Council should take the place in negotiation with the situation in Palestine and Israel, because Palestine cannot negotiate with Israel by themselves. They're too weak. They have no resources, and they will lose more in that regard. The international community has a responsibility, and I think that it lies fundamentally with the United Nations to be involved in this. I was also very enthusiastic, and still am, that the best solution is a two-state solution. I know some people have argued that much has changed with a lot of the settlers there, and some people have come up with the idea of a democratic one-state solution. But having looked at what happened over the last 15 months or so in that area, and the fact that when you look at the public opinion in Israel, that more than 60% of them were supportive of the genocide, I think it's very difficult to talk about a one-state solution. And difficult as it is, I believe that the call has got to be those settlers. They came from somewhere. Most of them came from the United States, some of them from Europe. They have their homes. Those are the ones that should vacate and go back to their homes. Nobody is chasing them out of the United States. Nobody is persecuting them in the United States or in Europe or any part of Europe. And I think that they should be asked to leave the land that they have come there illegally to settle on. And the other issue as it relates to Palestinian governance, I think it's an important question, because if the West's, particularly the US's proposal and Egypt's and Israel's proposal that Hamas will not have a say in to the affairs of Gaza or in the affairs of Palestine. You recall that when they had the one elections in Palestine, Hamas has actually won the elections. So I agree with Comrade Pandor that it is important for the Palestinians to have their say in this. And if the solution is not rooted in some type of democratic solution, I do not think that it will succeed. And it is not for any outside force to tell the Palestinian people who should be their government. It has to be a democratic solution if we are going to have lasting peace. These are some of the ideas that I'd like to share with colleagues today, and I want to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, President Donald Ramotar, for that. I think that your participation, your thoughts and ideas are very well taken, going into how we can resolve many of the crises in the world, in particular this crisis in the Middle East and Southwest Asia. So thank you very much for joining us. We will be going into the discussion period. To open us up, I'd like to have Dennis Fritz, who is with the Eisenhower Media Network, to go through a number of thoughts, but in particular Eisenhower's plan that he had for development.
Anastasia,
What's
actually, that's not what he's going to do. I'm
sorry.
Okay. So Dennis Fritz, who is the retired Command Chief Master Sergeant of the United States Air Force and the current director of the Eisenhower Media Network, is with us today. He's with us actually virtually every week. But we want to say something about why the Eisenhower Media Network is called the Eisenhower Media Network. And that relates to President Eisenhower's farewell address of January 17th, 1961. And this is what part of an excerpt of what was said by Dwight Eisenhower at that time. It's had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But now we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security more than the net income of all United States corporations. This conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals so that security and liberty may prosper together. Mr. Fritz is the author of the book Deadly Betrayal: The Truth About Why the United States Invaded Iraq. So, Sergeant Fritz.
Thank you. My namesake Dennis, and as one of my colleagues will say, Ray McGovern, can I be heard?
You can be.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Should be.
Well, listen, in 2003, the U.S. invasion of Iraq started my crusade as part of being a part of peace and diplomacy. You know, I became sick and tired of the imperialistic profiteering wars that were happening. You know, we talk about Dwight D. Eisenhower, later president. I'm going to throw in another name, General Smedley Butler, 1935, war is a racket. And likewise, President Eisenhower warned us about the influence of the military-industrial complex. And so the Eisenhower Media Network, we came about as former military, intelligence, civilian, national security officials who realized that the United States foreign policy and national security was not making us safe nor the world safer. So a number of us came together. Some names, as I just mentioned, Ray McGovern, former CIA, Larry Wilkerson, some of you have heard about, who's one of my colleagues, Eisenhower Media Network, who was the chief of staff to Colin Powell, and also Colin Powell's special assistant when Colin was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And so we came together realizing and understanding that peace and diplomacy was the only way to make the United States and the world a safer place. Now, before I go any further, and I want to keep in mind the time because I want to make sure that the audience have time to ask questions of our distinguished guest from South Africa. And I just want to say a special thanks to South Africa. When we talk about adults being in the room, when we talk about peace in the Middle East and the situation in Gaza, we're definitely South Africa should be the adults in the room at that table who understands apartheid and oppression. And so absolutely. Now, I want to talk about two quick things that's on the plate today that disturbs us all. That's in the Middle East and in Europe, specifically Ukraine-Russia war. One, I'm very optimistic about, and one, unfortunately, I'm very pessimistic about. When Dennis mentioned, the book I wrote that book at that time in support of the U.S. military men and women of our United States, where 4,500 of them lost their lives, hundreds of thousands wounded for life, and then hundreds of thousands of Iraqis that were killed and wounded. And I saw a move afoot to go to Iran, and I wanted to prevent that, and that got me in this crusade. Now, when we talk about the Middle East, I mentioned in my book, particularly for the United States, that we need in the future to watch who our presidential candidates surround themselves regarding foreign policy. Now, I'm going to shock some when I say this, but I am very sincere, and history will prove this to be correct. I have tend in the United States to side more so with the Democratic Party. But I must tell you that the Biden administration was probably the most evilest administration in my lifetime. And Fritz, why do you say that? How can you allow the women and children and men that have been killed, brutalized, maimed in Gaza? The United States, and particularly the Biden administration, were complicit. And not only were they complicit, they really own it. They provided diplomatic cover, provided the weapons, and provided the funding. And not saying a word about doing anything to stop Bibi Netanyahu, who has always wanted to do this. Now, this is the one where I'm pessimistic because of the fact I just told you that President Biden's administration is probably the most evilest of my lifetime. Now, before that, George W. Bush, when he went into Iraq, he was surrounded by, the term we use a lot of neocons. Biden was surrounded by a lot of Zionists. Fact. Now, why am I worried and pessimistic about the Middle East? As I stated in my book, watch who a presidential candidate, and then if that person becomes president, who they surround themselves when it comes to foreign policy. And I must tell you, Trump has surrounded himself with the most extreme Israeli supporting administration in my lifetime to match the most extreme far-right administration in Israel. And that is scary. You look at Rubio, Secretary of State. I think he's received over $77,000 in support from the Israeli lobby. You look at our UN ambassador, Elise Stefanik, an extreme Zionist. You look at our Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. All along, he's been sorting bombing before he became the Secretary, the bombing of Iran. And unfortunately, you look at our ambassador to Israel, will soon to be, if he's not confirmed yet, Mike Huckabee, a most extreme Christian Zionist. And that worries me. And then you hear a person who, in our president, uninformed about the world, now saying in his warped mind that we're going to own Gaza. How are we going to own something that's not ours? How are we going to buy some original when you say we're going to buy something that's not ours? It's not Israel's. It is very pessimistic for me. And I must tell you this, the most pessimistic words you're going to hear from me as I promote peace and diplomacy. But unfortunately, I am feeling that the only way to bring about that two-state solution, which we all support and which has been America's policy for decades, I am concerned that the only way it's going to take is war. I really do. And that's unfortunate. We have to bring Israel to the table because Bibi Netanyahu and the far-right government, they don't believe in a two-state solution. We must be factual about that. They don't believe in a two-state solution. And it's going to take countries like Egypt and Jordan, because I'm just fearful of an uprising there. I was disappointed in the king when he came. I mean, you can be tactful, diplomatic, and saying, Mr. President, I disagree with you. We're going to have to work this out, and we'll take this on. We will rebuild Gaza. You don't have to come in and rebuild Gaza, and we're not going to displace people. That's why I'm more pessimistic. Let's move on to Ukraine and the Russian war. Now, we talk about adults in the room. Here's a major irony right now. The biggest surprise of my life is yesterday, who I don't agree with on a lot of things, but even if somebody is someone who I disagree with, I will join you and support you if you're doing something I think is great for mankind and humanity. President Trump yesterday tried to be, believe it or not, the adult in the room when he said that, hey, we must reduce our military budgets. We must do everything we can to get rid of nuclear weapons. I'm looking forward to talking to China and Russia. That is being an adult, whether he really believed that in his mind or not, but that is being an adult. And unfortunately, those that don't believe in peace and diplomacy, they're going to try to tear him down. I think somebody alluded to that earlier. Those in the European community are going to try to tear him down. I would ask that your audience go back and take a look. You know, we're in this age of Google. Back in May of 2023, the Eisenhower Media Network put out a New York Times paid ad saying that the U.S. should be a force for peace. And we talked about how it should be diplomacy versus pushing for war in Ukraine. We are causing the full destruction of their infrastructure in Ukraine and lives lost. I think someone heard me say in a previous presentation that we in the United States of America are using the Ukrainians to die on our behalf to weaken Russia so that we can maintain our imperialistic advantage over the world. Now, for those of you that are in Europe, don't think you are immune from the United States. Imagine somebody representing our government, that being Senator Lindsey Graham, telling our allies and friends in Europe that we would do everything we can to take down your economy if you try to arrest a war criminal in Bibi Netanyahu. Think about our United States of America threatening our members in Canada and Mexico of trying to tear down their economies. In fact, believe it or not, taking over Canada and making it a 51st state. Why am I saying this? We as a world must come together. I live in the United States of America. I love living in the United States of America, but we have a cruel and very evil and corrupt government. And we in the United States of America must do everything we can to overcome that. And we in the world, you must understand that in some ways, the United States only care about themselves and our oligarchs. They don't care about us as people. Think about it every year. We want the world to trust us, but every 4 years, half of us in the United States of America don't trust our government. Think about what I'm saying for a moment. Half of us in our United States of America, every 4 years, whichever party is in, don't trust our government, but yet we expect the world to trust us. Now, my optimism, I'm very optimistic that we can bring peace to Ukraine and Russia and Europe. When I alluded to the New York Times paid ad that we did in May of 2023, we talked about, I want you to think about this for a moment. Some have said that, some of you in the audience and some of the panel members, we are mouthpieces of Russia. No, you have to put yourself and empathize for other countries and their national security needs and interests. We have a map on that piece that says if Russia had nuclear weapons and fighter aircraft and military men and women based in Canada and based in Mexico, the United States of America, we will lose our minds. Well, in Ukraine, that is what we were trying to do in making them a part of NATO. By the way, if Ukraine became a part of NATO, they will be able to put nuclear weapons in NATO, in Ukraine. Think how Russia feels. And Russia warned us for years, don't do this. So we in the United States of America, we need to empathize with others' national security needs and interests as well. But I am more optimistic with the surprisingly adult in the room yesterday announcing that he really wants to bring peace between Ukraine and Russia. And there may have to be some loss by Ukraine in regards to land in that Donbass region. They're Russian speaking, and Russia must protect their national security interests as well. So I'll leave you with that. Our goals to be peace and diplomacy. I support the OASIS plan, and I'll leave it at that. And thanks for having me on again.
Thank you so much, Dennis Fritz, for your contribution, and especially for bringing in this quote from President Eisenhower. This is very important for Americans to recognize this very significant issue in the United States. So thank you so much for that. I'd like to ask, we're going to have a discussion amongst the panelists before we move on to the general discussion with the participants. I'd like to ask Helga if you have a response to anything thus far.
Yes. Well, first of all, I want to thank Dr. Pandor for giving the trust to the IPC process, including the Schiller Institute, to put together the kinds of initial groupings to explore this. One of them, can we get Israelis and Palestinians to accept to sit down on the same table, which we just heard Mr. Fritz being very pessimistic about. And indeed, there are some, extreme concerns, because we have been approached by many Palestinians who said, can you bring us together with some Israelis, because they refuse to talk to us. So we are quite aware of the difficulty. However, I think that one should not be deterred by problems of the past, because I think that we are in such a tectonic change of everything that new openings emerge. And one of them, which needs to be explored, is that National Security Advisor Waltz had said, Trump's proposal for the Riviera of Gaza is the best proposal on the table. But if somebody has a better proposal, they should come forward. And now this was repeated even by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who also said if somebody has a better plan, they should come forward with it. Now, I think that creates an opening, and given the fact that, the Egyptians have taken the lead in proposing their version of, the reconstruction of Gaza, I think, I would really urge all participants on this panel to help us to merge the two efforts, the Egyptian proposal with the OASIS plan, because I think if the Arab governments would, and I don't know, this is a question of communication, but what we are proposing is not just, let me say first the negative thing. If this goes wrong, not only is a general war in the Middle East possible. Colonel McGregor, who is also an extremely knowledgeable and very important analyst, he thinks that a general war in the Middle East will happen by the beginning of March, and he's also very pessimistic. Now, that could lead to a thermonuclear war, because once you would have a general war in the Middle East, including Iran, a possible attempt to destroy the nuclear research facilities of Iran, it has the potential of going completely out of control. So that is the one danger. The other one is that, if there would be an attempt to chase the Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank, this is going on as well, there would be the immediate possibility that 6 million new refugees would descend on the entire region, which, it was mentioned already, could destabilize every single government in the Middle East, or to Europe, which right now is being torn into pieces over the so-called migrant issue, because this is a complicated issue. There was again a massacre in Munich yesterday, and the whole country is in an uproar. The migrant issue obviously has been one of the key points of Trump building a wall with Mexico. And again, I fundamentally believe that the world hangs together in such a way. We are all sitting in one boat in a way it never has happened in history before, because of nuclear weapons, because of pandemics, because of the internet. We are really in one boat. And therefore, one has to seek for solutions which address everything at once. This is why we are calling for a new security and development architecture, in which the entire oasis plan for the entire Middle East, the region from India to the Mediterranean, from the Caucasus to the Gulf states, as one development area where the desert is supposed to be turned into agriculture, forestry, and livable land, and the addressing of the migrant issue, where we have basically put out a report saying that the only human way how to deal with the migrant issue in the United States and in Europe is that the European countries and the United States must join hands with the BRICS to develop the countries where the refugees are coming from, because they're not running away, risking their life out of pure fun, but because they have no existence for living. So the reconstruction of the Middle East as a joint project for Europe, for the United States, in hand with the BRICS, is the way to solve all the problems at once, and to bring development to Africa, which is in alignment with the plan of the African Union, the 2063 plan for Latin America. Likewise, a Latin American-wide infrastructure project where the United States and China would work together to lift these countries out of poverty, so that refugees no longer would run to the Mexican border, risking their life. Why don't we look at all of these things as one package? Because that would be the win-win approach, which I think will succeed.
Thank you, Helga, for that response. I also want to ask Her Excellency Naledi Pandor if you have a response to the discussion thus far. Excuse me, ma'am, you're muted.
Thank you. I'm sorry about the muting. I believe we've had excellent contributions. I do think the matter of the military industrial complex is one that all of us should be paying attention to. There is a proliferation of arms, and much of the conflict on the African continent is often due to arms that are brought into the continent by external groupings that fuel a great deal of hostility among various communities in countries in different regions of Africa. So I do think we need to alter the way in which we engage with the world. We do have a plan. We've got the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. These have been taken off the table for so long. And I agree with the former president that the biggest challenges that confront us are peace, inequality, and addressing poverty in our world. The large majority of people are experiencing great harm. They have no hope. And what is even more worrying is there's a growing hostility toward democratic practice and a democratic ethos. And so I do think all our countries need to move with urgency to assure the public that democracy does mean something positive, and that we do have individuals, institutions that can help to make a difference. If we miss this moment, I think we can't imagine the chaos that will confront us. So this is a time in which we need to use all the institutional capacity available to us to ensure that we return to rationality and that we have discussions and processes that address our deep-seated problems of inequality, of lack of livelihood, of insecurity caused by conflict. All of these are matters that we have been discussing for many, many decades, but we haven't found global cooperation in addressing these challenges. And I think we now need to build a truly practical and effective global coalition that will address these development challenges. I support the former president of Guyana when he says that there's a very important link between peace and development. And this is why we haven't seen progress on the African continent, because just as we make a step forward, you then have 10 steps back because of civil conflict or conflict between neighbors. So we need to really exert our efforts. I wonder whether it would be plausible in recognizing that there are advisors that are negative, whether we could create positive advisors who have a voice and who can use the many instruments of communication available throughout the world. One of the areas that concerns me is when a ridiculous idea is put forward, you don't see in the popular press a challenge to that. So we've even found that in the media, even though I know an idea is ridiculous, I treat it as though it has an opportunity to succeed. But we know it won't work. The people of Palestine will not accept forced removals, just as we in South Africa refused to accept forced removal. And so we need to be more clear about looking to history, looking to the solutions history has given us, and to actually warn those who encourage negative ideas that they need to move toward more positive objectives. So who are the people who can speak to President Trump, who can speak to President von der Leyen, who can speak to Chancellor Scholz? We need to get the leaders to agree that they will allow the world a pause so that we address the real issues: climate change, nuclear proliferation, the need for development, an end to poverty, gender equality, and all the negatives that are the real challenge of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Dr. Pandor, for that. I definitely think we'll be taking this up more thoroughly on how we can figure out who to reach out to. There are definitely people on this discussion right now who I believe can help us in the very immediate period in doing what you've proposed. So thank you so much for that. I'd like to ask President Donald Ramatar if you have any comment or response.
Just quickly, I find myself agreeing with both Dennis Fritz about what was happening in the Middle East, because I had a lot of discussion privately with my friend Dennis Small on this matter. And I was saying that when one of the reasons the Americans moved very early into the Middle East with their gun boats and so forth was to prevent the war from spreading, but spreading the war would have been in the interest of the Palestinians. But I also agree with Helga that the danger that exists with the possibility of a nuclear weapon, that we really can't possibly take that chance. And unfortunately, I think the philosophy of nuclear weapons that probably still dominate the thinking of many people, particularly in the West, which came out from the Reagan-Thatcher period, where Thatcher was arguing forcefully, they were both arguing forcefully against proposals from the Soviet Union. And they were saying that nuclear weapons was keeping the peace, that it was, they gave nuclear weapons the quality of keeping the peace after the Second World War. But now, of course, I always disagreed with that position. And now I think we're seeing a proliferation of countries trying to get nuclear weapons based on that same type of thinking, that nuclear weapons could prevent people from attacking them and so on and so forth. So I think that one of the things that we have to emphasize is one of the violation of the principle that resulted in what we see happening in Russia, Ukraine, and that is you cannot have peace, you cannot have security at the expense of another country's security. What NATO was trying to do was to increase their security by putting pressure on Russian security. And that has ended up to where we are now. And I believe that this is the area that we should also revive the fight against nuclear weapons, the call for talks to get rid of nuclear weapons, and go back to uphold that principle of no country can have security at the expense of another country, or no region can have security at the expense of another region. That would be my small contribution at this point in time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, President Ramatar, for your contribution. I'd like to ask Dennis Fritz of the Eisenhower Media Network, Director of the Eisenhower Media Network, if you have a response thus far.
Well, let me just say one thing, is that it saddens me to be pessimistic about the Middle East. It truly, especially when we all want peace and diplomacy. But at the same time, we have to be realistic. You have to have willing partners. And as alluded to earlier, Palestinian people are not going to leave their land. Jordan nor Egypt can afford to even give any inclination that they're going to accept Palestinians in a piece of land, whether it be in Egypt or Jordan. And what scares me most, as I mentioned earlier, is about uprisings in Egypt and Jordan. And you've heard Egypt here in the last few days saying that they have a plan. I remember back when I was in the Pentagon, the current king, his father, King Hussein of Jordan, back during the first George H.W. Bush administration. And he told President Bush at the time, H.W. Bush, that you Americans don't understand the Middle East. You don't understand that the Palestinians will not leave their land. They will not be removed again with the fear of not being able to come back. And that's why it really scares me that it's going to probably, take some form of war to bring Israel to the table, to realize their only way of survival and having security is that two-state solution. That's the only way. That is the only way. The other thing I will mention too, when we talk about nuclear war, where in order for them to have a nuclear exchange, it will have to be uh, initiated by Israel. At the time, they're the only Middle East country that have allegedly nuclear weapons. Now, I'm always mixed up. Do they really have them? You have some that say they have them, but I will go, most experts say they do have them. They will be the country that have to initiate that. And so if there's a nuclear exchange, then that could possibly bring in, which a lot of people don't realize is, India and Pakistan who have nuclear weapons, and that will be probably where the exchange will take place. And let me just mention Iran, so most folks will understand this. Bibi Netanyahu has been saying for decades that Iran is 2 days away from a nuclear weapon. Decades. Go and look it up. If Iran wanted to have a nuclear weapon, they would have had it decades ago. They don't want a nuclear weapon, but Israel used that as a rationale to attack Iran. Why? So that they can have complete control of the Middle East. And, oh, by the way, they can have their way with the Palestinian people because they will have no one else supporting them.
Right. No, I think that's true. And it is very important to remind everyone that supposedly Israel is the nation that has nuclear weapons in the region, and we should be very mindful of this. So thank you for that, Dennis Fritz, and your contribution. We are going to be going to the general discussion with others who are participating on the call. I'd like to just thank, in particular, Garland Nixon and our friends at Do Dissidents who are live streaming this across their platforms. If you are on those platforms or YouTube, Rumble, please go to schillerinstitute.com and you will find the registration page to get on to the Zoom link. Right now, you must be registered to get on to participate in the dialogue process with the speakers today. And I just want to acknowledge those people who are live streaming with us today. And with that, Dave, just let me know when the stream is cut.